This is Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. About 2 months ago, hundreds of thousands of people around the world took to the streets in a People's Climate March to demand action on climate change. Now, at the United Nations Climate Conference in Lima, Peru, those activists will find out whether their cries for action were actually heard. Yesterday marked the beginning of the conference, where delegates from more than 190 countries will set the agenda for next year's climate meeting in Paris. The ultimate goal for the UN Conference on Climate Change is to prevent a 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degree Fahrenheit rise in world temperatures. But with 2014 being the hottest year on record, after 20 years of climate talks, environmental groups remain skeptical about whether politics can be set aside for the greater good of the planet. Two countries responsible for 42% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, China and the U.S., have already made promises to reduce their emissions. The U.S. has pledged to reduce emissions by up to 28% below 2005 levels by the year 2025, and China has promised to reduce emissions after the year 2030. The European Union, which is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, has also pledged to cut emissions 40% from 1990 levels by 2030. While these promises might seem encouraging, none of them are actually legally binding, and the UN has determined that carbon emissions need to be reduced well before 2030 in order to avoid catastrophic warming. Joining us now live from Lima is Dr. Michael Dorsey. He is the interim director of the Program on Energy and Environment at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. He was a member of Senator Barack Obama's Energy and Environment presidential campaign team. He also served on the EPA's National Advisory Committee. He is at the conference in Lima. Welcome to Uprising, Michael.
Sonali, thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, first, tell us who is at this conference. Is it only country delegates, or are there also representatives from corporations that are present? Are there members of civil society and activist groups that are inside?
Indeed, all of those entities and organizations are here at the 20th meeting of the countries working on the climate negotiations. We've got many corporations that are here. Many of them are aligning themselves in associations. One big association of perhaps more than 1,000 of them is the International Emissions Trading Association. You've got oil and gas companies represented. You also have a great number of large civil society organizations, representatives from the U.S., like the Sierra Club from around the world, Friends of the Earth, as well as the member states of the United Nations that are also here, that are working out the agreements that we're going to hopefully see coming out of Peru.
Now, I understand that the conference is being held on the grounds of a military area with more than 12,000 police guarding the venue. Is this kind of security necessary, and why did the Peruvian government invest so much in installing this kind of show of force?
Well, oftentimes at diplomatic events like this and multilateral meetings, the venues are not the most ideal locations, and indeed, security is an issue. It always is when you have heads of state coming to meetings, but the venue is one that's on the military base. And it is indeed drawing on the resources of the Peruvian army and so forth. But nothing really uncommon with that, no different than the huge security that you see at the General Assembly in New York when blocks and blocks are shut down and creating headache for New Yorkers, etc.